Hello to our session on interactive media art. Yeah, so finally we made it to art. We are part of the arts department, so art should play a role. This will be a very short introduction on some, artists and their works that I have subjectively chosen. It is by no means a thorough introduction to the field. Fortunately enough, you will have, over the course of your studies, more chance to go a bit deeper into that field, in particular in the course Understanding I Am. So here is interactive media art seen as part of the development that we have been following step by step over the time being. So to start with interactive media art, it's useful to look a bit before the advent of what we now think of as computer art or generative art, which is in the early 20th century when electromechanical and early electronic devices offered new capabilities to create any kind of experience. The first steps in the direction of interactive media were taken in the very fermenting and revolutionary grounds of the 1920s, in particular in the field of music. So there's the Russian electro engineer and musician Leon Theremin, that is his westernized name.
So the theremin is controlled by movement. The antennas register the movements of the hand. The vertical rod registers the movements of the right hand and is controlling the pitch. The left hand controls the volume. And theremin was used throughout the 20th century, in particular in film productions.
The music as a field of artistic expression for, I would say, 30 to 50 years stayed ahead of the curve. So music was where interactive media, where the new technology first found its way to be used by artists. One of the most influential was John Cage.
Cage prepared musical instruments, in this example the piece for prepared piano, with alterations. For example, he put screws and nails into the piano to alter the sounds, but he would go much further. He would experiment with all kinds of noises and create totally different approaches to how sound could be experienced by an audience as an immersive performance. Cage's influence on the development of art and technology and interactive media can't be overestimated. He was really the first person, I would say, who brought also the use of electronic instruments into classical music, namely his Imaginary Landscape No. 1 from 1939, as you see performed here. figure in the early days of interactive media is Jean Tinguely. Tinguely is a Swiss artist. You find his collection and museum in Basel in Switzerland. In 1960 created for the MoMA in New York this machine performance, an homage à New York. One of the people working with him was the television engineer Billy Klüver. Klüver is a Swedish-born engineer who worked for the AT&T Bell Lab, the American telephone and telegraph company, as you might remember, holding a monopoly for their trade at that time, was obliged to give a lot of money into other fields like arts and sciences. So Klüver was a very experienced early on television engineer. He, for example, built the first television antenna on top of the Eiffel Tower in Paris. He worked with Jacques Cousteau on his exploring the oceans television recordings, and met another artist who is really the figure with whom interactive media takes off, Robert Rauschenberg.
So Klüver and Robert Rauschenberg started working together in 1960 in this installation by Tinguely, and kept working together for the next 8 or so years. And the outcome is a series of works of art by namely Robert Rauschenberg, co-financed obviously by AT&T, that would set the tracks for electronic and interactive media. You see them here working on Rauschenberg's sculpture Oracle.
Oracle contain speakers and controls and are meant to be interactively played with by the audience. So it is truly an interactive media installations, and I think it was the first truly interactive media art that found broad acceptance.
Oracle was the first in a series of works that becomes the nucleus of a event series called Experiments in Art and Technology. So in 1966, Rauschenberg, together with others, created 9 evenings of theater and engineering that had the subtitle Experiments in Art and Technology, financed and supported by the Bell Labs with 30 engineers and scientists. All the artists at that time that basically Rauschenberg would know or that would have a residency at the Bell Labs in New Jersey or in Silicon Valley would participate. It's artists like Gustav Metzger, famous for his self-destructive art, Tinguely, for example, Wen Ying Tsai, or Namjoon Paik, who I have introduced in another lecture already. So the idea was to bring together art and engineering to create something that was not there before, which would be craftful, interactive media art. I mean, before this Experiments in Art and Technology, artists would usually be the masters of their technology themselves. Here, there was a huge lab with all the intellectual power and expertise in the technologies behind creating the art, much more as you would expect artists working with technologies that require craftsmanship. The art and technologies, experiments in art and technologies were publicly displayed in the Armory in New York.
Laurie Speaker, one of the artists at Bell Labs and a pioneer of electronic music. She developed and worked with the state-of-the-art synthesizer technology, which of course at that time was mostly analog. One of the remarkable facts about Laurie Spiegel is that her composition Harmonica Mundi, dedicated to Johannes Kepler, was included on the Golden Record on the Voyager spacecraft that left the solar system. So she is part of the way humankind is represented to aliens, may they ever find this record on the spacecraft. Included in the show is Lillian Schwartz. So Lillian Schwartz's work, Proxima Centauri from 1968, is electromechanical. So it uses electrical gear and light to create a three-dimensional interactive media sculpture. The work by Lillian Schwartz is probably even more influential. It is her 1970s short movie Pixelation. So Pixelation, although it looks digital, is a painting. It is a series of animated paintings that is accompanied by synthesizer music played on the analog synthesizer Moog. That was kind of state of the art at that time. So you see this combination of geometric and organic patterns that, of course, at that time could not be created with electronic means. Pixelation is in particular influential and foreboding the digital times by concentrating on what we might now call the atom of visual electronic arts, the pixel, so that we don't have actually an analog canvas that is continuous, but a pixelated world that is mapped. The American brothers, James and John Whitney, had experimented in similar ways using painting and shifting and moving the paintings within a recording to create abstract art on film. James Whitney's short film Yantra can be regarded probably as the first successful experiment. James' younger brother John would experiment with analog computers that were used since World War II to calculate the trajectories of ballistic missiles and
film made under
other
a research
projectiles.
program in computer.
And
The
here he
images are
demonstrates
arranged
how
to
he
illustrate this
integrates
talk, which
this
will be an attempt to
technology
suggest some of the
into
formal
his
problems
art,
that hold my interest
using
regarding
this
design in motion.
state-of-the-art IBM
This
computer.
is the IBM 2250 graphic play console that generates the images in motion which I have been exploring. Dr. Jack Citron of IBM, who developed the computer program for this project, is demonstrating the way we select numerical variables that determine a particular graphic pattern. The program is based upon a single polar coordinate equation having about 20 parameters. Using the light pen, numerical values can be chosen and given to any of the parameters of the program. One soon learns how to control the graphic possibilities of this new medium and realizes that it is a very powerful and versatile figure generator. When the camera is used, control of the computer program is by punched cards, not the light pen. The camera, using black and white motion picture film, is automatically operated by control signals generated by the computer program. At a later stage, I recopy, with an optical printer, the black and white images onto color film. Using an assortment of color filters and superimposers, I am able to produce the images which you will see in the remainder of this film. This is one kind of action that I have been exploring. Asymmetrical, not center-oriented, a fluid kind of motion that is not stuck in one place. This motion is multiplex, no static elements except when it comes to rest. It has a path in space which is approximately a trajectory. I call it a linear figure. The essential problem with this kind of motion must resemble the creative problem of melody writing. It is, perhaps in its purest form, the most highly concentrated case study of the essence of art itself, involving as it does balance, contrast, tension, and resolution, all brought into play with minimum expenditure. Perhaps if these actions were structured with still greater contrasts of motion and scale, and some as yet unknown qualities, they might be developed through variations that we could recognize and respond to directly and emotionally. Of course, even these actions on the screen might work better if there were music of some sort related to them. I think of sound as a partner to this kind of visual experience, but I do not want the graphics to play a role of the lesser subservient partner. Starting with recorded history, I suppose we have had as much experience creating melodies as creating poetry. But who has experienced the satisfaction of composing more than a fragment in this new audiovisual art? What is needed, therefore, is for someone to be able to add a few years' experience to perfect his skill at designing motion for the eye to perceive. You have been seeing a kind of motion which I would have you compare with melodic linear phenomena of music. The comparison might be carried a step farther by showing how we might relate and harmonize two or more actions that run simultaneously. Here is a simple and obvious and quite infallible kind of polographic relationship. Parallel action rotated into 4 quadrant positions. Now, from here on, I'm going to present a kind of spoken counterpoint. I'll interrupt myself to explain what is on the screen, but I have more to say in general about formal problems. For example, the op art directions have indicated what values can be found in the effects of color as an experience for its own sake.
Computer graphics by John Whitney found wide applications in cinema. It became known to a broad public in the title sequence of Alfred Hitchcock's Vertigo, where you see these lines being superimposed on an image of a woman's eye. Later, many television stations around the world used John Whitney's graphics as to separate ad breaks from the content and also to separate the commercial spots from each other. One of the works of art in early interactive media that I like particularly much is Anthony McCall's A Line Describing a Cone from 1973.
Line Describing a Cone is 30 minutes long. It's a 16mm film, so it's projected, a film projector. We have the projector at one end of the space. What happens at the beginning is that there's a pencil of light that runs through space from the projector to the wall. The image on the wall at that point is just a dot of white light. That dot on the wall gradually traces a circle, leaving a trail behind it. Traces it very, very slowly. It takes half an hour to define an entire circle. And in the end, you have a complete hollow cone of light in space. This has a certain drama to it. As it completes itself, there's a kind of well, of course, there's no surprises. Everyone can see where it's going. And then they kind of begin to quite eagerly wait for it to complete itself. You can watch it however you want, but I'd recommend perhaps try standing with your back to the image and looking toward the projector and see what you see and go from there.
Anthony McCall's Line Describing a Cone, since you can actually step into the cone and modify the light cone by casting a shadow, is, in my view, really a truly interactive work of media art that combines film with a performative but also an installation experience. It's called expanded cinema because it expands what cinema is by adding an interactive component to the video experience. So this was played on much further by the 1967 Czechoslovakian experimental film Kino Automat by Radus Cinchera. So this was Czechoslovakia's contribution to the World Exposition in Montreal in Canada. As you will see in the clip, the experience here is actually a multi-threaded model of interactive film.
One's own wife seems to have them more often. Good afternoon. Any messages?
Should there be?
No, but I thought I might as well ask you. Life's so full of delightful surprises.
Oh, no. Oh, please, will you help me, Mr. Novak? Can I come in for a minute? I haven't any clothes on. The wind blew my door shut and I can't get back in.
Impossible.
Oh, please, please.
Better come in.
Mr. Novak! Mr. Novak!
Yeah, with Kinoautomat finally, television fulfilled what Nam June Paik had 1965 already demanded. Television has been attacking us all our lives, and now we can attack it back. Well, the actual revolution that took place a few years later was in 1971 when Sony, the Japanese electronics company, introduced the first consumer-grade video camera, the Sony Portapak. So with the Portapak, it was finally possible for filmmakers and artists to really create anti-television, as that was called in experimental film at that time, to create a counterpublic without having the backings of the large advertising industry that would usually finance television productions or state-owned television broadcasters like the BBC in the UK. One of the influential people that has a particular connection to this school, of course, is Red Burns. Red Burns is often called the godmother of Silicon Alley. You know, Silicon Alley is how the New Yorkers called their digital startup scene, their venture capital scene in Manhattan particularly, because in Manhattan you have not a valley, but you have alleys between the skyscrapers. So Silicon Alley was always kind of a riff on Silicon Valley. And there's always these rivalries between the two cities. It's more joking than real. New York, without doubt, is the second largest center for digital investment in the world. And I mean, also without doubt, it is one of the leading publishing centers for television and video content. So Red Burns bought one of these Sony cameras and started her career in interactive media. She is the initiator of NYU's interactive telecommunication program that was then placed in the Tisch School of the Arts in NYU. So with her engagement in 1971 and then later becoming the chairwoman of ITP, the systematic, I would say, academic study and practice of interactive media has begun. And this is, of course, how our school here also starts, because we are a spin-off of New York's ITP.
Burns died in 2013, aged 88 years, and to her death was a illustrious figure in the New York art and technology scene, and continued to lecture at ITP. Another artist in the field of extended cinema is Lynn Hirshman Leeson. So Lynn Hirshman has been also experimenting with art and technology over a long time. But what I want to present here is her work, Lorna. Lorna was the first digital interactive media art, a bit in the way that Kinoautomat was with analog media. Lynn Hirshman uses an optical disc, at that time the only medium that would allow sufficient storage. Remote control, you experience a multi-threaded story, the life of a woman that suffers from agoraphobia. It's a very personal and very dramatic story, and very suspenseful to play.
Are you sure it's 10 to 1? Yes. I've got to do it even if it's a squeeze. I'm desperate.
Well, have a nice trip.
Yes, you're confirmed on it. 10 to 1?
Harun Farocki is the descendant of Indian immigrants to Germany. He lived most of his life in Germany. He died in 2014, aged only 70 years, I think. And can be regarded as a filmmaker for documentary films, but positioned himself also as an artist. His works, serious games, as well as parallels, document the intersection of entertainment technology and the military.
Yeah, I got eyes on the second one. I can't get a shot. I just went behind him.
I don't have eyes.
These two are.
Hey, there's a tank in front of us. 12 o'clock. Where?
You see him, Mackie?
12 o'clock to the vehicle. Like the vehicle. Look at the vehicle.
Where? He's over there. Fuck you. Hey, Charlie, sweep around to my left and right and golf him.
Alright.
A German artist in interactive media who explores the role of the image from a different angle, but not totally dissimilar of Harun Farocki. Video, How to Become Invisible, shows the whole field of electronically altered imagery and the role of high-resolution surveillance images, and offers a playful way of counter-surveillance by disguising yourself from the gaze of the electronic spies.
There are 7 ways of becoming a picture. To camouflage, to conceal, to cloak, to mask, to be painted, to disguise, to mimicry, to key. Around 2000, a new standard for resolution targets is introduced. This is a pixel-based resolution chart. It serves to shoot pixels. In 1996, photographic resolution in the area is about 12 meters per pixel. Today it is 1 foot.
View on extended cinema and other forms of video-related work with a look on the artist group Forensic Architecture. Well, strictly speaking, Forensic Architecture could also just be called a research group. They're working from Goldsmiths University in London and financed by human rights groups as well as governmental or international organizations. What they do is using electronic media and visualization to uncover the truth of war crimes, of catastrophes that happen to refugees, and settle disputes.
So far, we have mainly concentrated our focus on audiovisual art. That's no surprise. In the, I would say, first 3/4 of the 20th century, interactive media and new media art was basically audiovisual. It was electronic music and extended cinema and other forms of cinematic experience. That changed, of course, in the 1990s when the focus completely shifted to digital art, in particular, of course, net art, the internet. In 2016, the Whitechapel Gallery in London celebrated 50 years of electronic art, of interactive media art, with this seminal show, Electronic Superhighway. Using this title from Nam June Paik, this show would be a retrospective starting with Robert Rauschenberg's experiments in art and technology and go all the way through the current times. The retrospective was curated by Omar Kholev. Omar is the director of collections and the director of directing curator at the Sharjah Art Foundation. So I really hope that soon, when things open up, we all can enjoy Omar's great curatorial work. I know that he had already put together a super interesting show about art in the age of surveillance that was already announced by the Sharjah Art Foundation and couldn't take place because of the lockdown. So let's have a look inside this show that I actually very much liked. On the ground floor was contemporary art, first floor was the beginning of internet art, and second floor was kind of the historic art of the 1960s and 70s. So you would kind of walk your way back in time, starting in the ground floor and then going up. At least this is how I experienced the exhibition. If you look to the ceiling, you see this chandelier of surveillance cameras by Eddie Wagenknecht. Eddie is the initiator of an artist group and research collective called Deep Lab. It's particularly a feminist collective, and Eddie is also a part of Professor Heather's artist collective, Refresh, and they in working together in kind of overcoming the very strongly masculine and Western bias of interactive media. As a side note, by the way, Lynn Hirshman Leeson is the only woman that ever was given the prize of the Golden Nika by Ars Electronica Festival in Linz, which is regarded the most important show of electronic art. So you see clearly there's hundreds of men receiving these prizes every year and hardly any women. Yeah, what I find really interesting in Eddie Wagenknecht's work, and we will hopefully see much more of that in the next also lessons, is taking this archetypical camera that of course other people also see, and this I found really confusing, seeing this other work here featured in an exhibition at ZKM in Karlsruhe, or this one in Turin, a espresso maker in the shape of a camera by Carlo Galli in 2005. So with electronic media, things become typical, and copying and riffing and remixing and the mesh-up are clearly important aspects of electronic art. I mean, actually, it is fair to ask what the meaning of an original work of art in the age of flawless reproducibility actually should mean. I mean, digital art can, by definition, never be original. There is no original piece of art that then gets copied, of course. If you look down, here you see the installation of another artist whom I like very much. It is Zach Blas. Zach Blas is an American also teaching at Goldsmith currently, who is not only, I would say, one of the really interesting voices in interactive media with aspects of gender and queerness, but also an artist that has always kind of a very I would say, satirical and fun way to look at things.
Collectivism as a social ideal is dead. But capitalism has not yet been discovered. While partaking in this perverse gesture, which I will hesitantly, yet rationally, indulge my loyal followers, let us scour in the outer regions of our mind's perceptive capacities for capitalism's unknown ideals.
Of art in the show at Whitechapel that I remember personally as being super interesting for me at its time is the website of the artist group Jodi.org. It's two Dutch artists working together, Joan Hemskerk and Dirk Peesmans.
So this is how the installation at the Whitechapel Gallery looked, and that was, of course, nothing as I experienced it in the 1990s. So when the web was new, there were no color LCD monitors, no flat screens. Everyone had tube monitors still that at best would display colors. Most people had just still black and white monitors at that time, at least at their workplaces. And internet connection was, of course, slow and you had to dial up. So experiencing a site like Jodi.org was totally different and is by no means represented here in a meaningful way, I think. Curatorial, this is really some, I would say, demanding task. This is another one, the scroll bar composition of 2005 by Robert Legte. So Legte not only did screen art, but also built these navigation and screen metaphors in wood and other materials so that you could literally see them as if they would be really windows or really kind of physical things. The problem is that as you see it here, we don't have frames anymore in HTML. So a browser today would probably not be able to display the work of art as it is in a way emulated here in the Whitechapel Gallery. And again, I mean, of course, the display on a computer at that time would look totally differently because no one would have a monitor with such high resolution, and hence the picture would be much, much smaller and much more cramped. I mean, most of the art has this fate anyway. I mean, that it fails. So as we will go on discussing in the next lecture also, interactive media has a problem of, I would say, proper experience. It easily breaks. I mean, you can't experience electronic media usually the same way you can just walk into a gallery and look at paintings. Someone has to really put effort in keeping them running. Their operation systems get outdated. Their internet connections become a security risk because you can't update the firmware. As you go to physical computing and use the Arduino, you will face some of these difficulties. But of course, in the time that we are seeing here, that we have covered so far, there was no Arduino anyway. So this is a real interesting challenge in making electronic media, in making interactive media art. It is making things that don't immediately break. Or if you do make things that break, then make it part of the thing. Don't be ashamed of it. Don't try to cover it. An interesting outsider in the field is David Hockney. So David Hockney is a British-born artist who lives at the US West Coast and is very famous for his paintings and the use of photography in painting. He could be described as a second-generation pop artist. I mean, obviously influenced by Andy Warhol. David Hockney also puts together pop imagery of like swimming pools, Los Angeles landscapes, and has motives of queer and California life. In the 1990s, Hockney moved on from his use of the Polaroid camera. The Polaroid camera is a camera that immediately self-develops a photo and started using these throwaway film cameras that became a thing at that time. I don't know if any one of you have ever seen that, but in the time before digital cameras, there were these so-called Funsaver cameras produced by the filmmaker Kodak. That was basically a film in a paper box where you can shoot 24 or 35 images about that and then send the whole box for development and get the paper images back. This throwaway camera would have a widescreen lens and would create really interesting images. So Hockney is an artist using new forms of photography and painting early on, and I mean, just as kind of a continuation of that, these images you see in the current exhibition. That's, I think, 2 years ago in I think in the Whitney in New York. So these images use iPads, and he made iPad art with the iPad pencil in kind of the same way as he would have used photography earlier. Well, one problem with interactive media or art and technology in general, as you might have guessed already, is diversity. From the beginning, really, it was mainly men. And you could say, well, in the 1920s or 30s, I mean, the whole world was mainly men. But after the Second World War, I would say other fields clearly developed a sense of diversity, in particular after the 1980s and postmodern criticism, gender movement, and then, of course, the post-colonial turn of including artists from a non-Western background. I mean, if you go across international art exhibitions like the Venice Biennial or so, I mean, clearly you see the curatorial effort that usually is put into diversity, and of course, that's, I mean, without saying. However, in interactive media, that is not the case. I mean, interactive media has really an issue in that. So interactive media is this kind of has this macho maker culture so dominantly that people seem not even to notice that something is missing. So this is the golden Nike. So Nike of Samothrake is this famous statue of an angel-like creature that you find in the Louvre. It's like 2,500 years old or something like that. It's classical Greek sculpture. And for a reason that I actually don't know, it is the most prestigious prize in electronic media, the Prix Ars Electronica, that is given to artists every year in Linz. I mentioned that Lynn Hirshman received this prize. Well, I mean, the interesting thing of that, as women artists used to point out, is that it is a headless woman, and no wonder that it is hardly ever granted to women artists. This lack of diversity is the starting point for an initiative kicked off by Professor Heather Dewey-Hackborg, who brought together women artists to overcome this horrible flaw in diversity. So the collective Refresh put together a remarkable exhibition on diverse art in art and technology called Refiguring the Future. For me, Refiguring the Future was indeed the most inspiring exhibition that I've seen to this point in the field of art and technology. And I think this list of artists that you see here is a good it's a good harbor from which you can set sail to explore contemporary art and technology that is more diverse than what you would find in the traditional fields, in the traditional exhibitions as like Ars Electronica or you name it. So with that, we close the chapter on the history of art and technology, and the next time we will move on to see speculative futures coming out of the interactive media, how to use interactive media to envision what's to come and to also speculate about the future of communication and technology.